Jonathan Swift's A Tale of a Tub is a satirical allegory that critiques religious excess, literary criticism, and intellectual climate of his time. The work is structured as a combination of a primary narrative, an allegory of three brothers and their courts, interwoven with numerous digressions that serve as pointed commentaries on society. The introduction begins with a discussion on how writers establish their reputations, comparing it to public speaking platforms such as the pulpit, the lecture stand, and even the gallows. Swift then satirizes literary conventions, especially the art of introduction, noting that a skilled writer hides his main arguments much like a nut within a shell, a technique he employs extensively. He then outlines his treatise, initially intending to divide it into 40 sections, though he digresses frequently throughout the work. The primary narrative begins in section 2, where a dying father leaves his three sons, Peter, Jack, and Martin, three coats which are perfect and imperishable as long as they follow his instructions. These codes symbolize religious doctrine, and the father's will represent sacred scripture. The sons initially adhere to the will's commands, but as they journey through the world, they become enamored with contemporary trends. When they wish to add shoulder knots to their coats, a fashionable accessory, they search for a justification within the will. Finding letters that resemble the word shoulder knots, they convince themselves that their modifications are permissible. Over time, they continue altering their coats in response to fleeting fashions, rationalizing each change through selective and often absurd interpretations of their father's instructions. In section 3, Swift interrupts the tale with a digression concerning critics. He distinguishes between genuine critics and superficial ones, the latter being those who claim authority without merit. This section also introduces the contrast between ancients and moderns, a recurring theme in Swift's critique of contemporary thought. Returning to the main narrative in section 4, the eldest brother Peter begins to assert dominance over his siblings, claiming he deserves wealth and power. He embarks on numerous grand projects such as purchasing a continent, creating new remedies, and inventing novel products, all while developing delusions of grandeur. His brothers, witnessing his increasing corruption, attempt to reason with him, but he is too consumed by his self importance. They then decide to re examine their father's will, translating it into simpler language to better understand its original intent. Another digression, a digression in the modern kind, justifies the use of digression itself, suggesting that sometimes indirect argumentation is more enlightening than direct instruction. Swift resumes his criticism of modern intellectual trends, particularly their deviation from classical wisdom. In section 6, Peter continues to live in wealth, while Jack and Martin, now impoverished, cling to each other for support. They decide to restore their coats to their original condition by removing the embellishments they had previously added. However, Martin takes a measured approach, carefully undoing the changes, whereas Jack, driven by zealotry, rips off the adornments in a frenzy, damaging his coat. This difference in method highlights their diverging ideological paths. Swift then includes a digression in Price of Digressions, humorously arguing that certain types of argumentation can be illuminating, particularly when running parallel to other discussions. He also critiques modern wit, offering suggestions on how to appear clever without true intelligence. Section 8 shifts focus to the concept of inspiration, comparing it to wind and vapors. This is followed by a digression concerning madness, which briefly discusses Jack, whom the narrator deems mad. Swift explores how great historical figures, often possessing extreme religious convictions, achieved power and influence. He suggests that society should seek out seemingly unstable young men as they might possess the madness necessary for greatness. In section 10, Swift satirizes the act of writing prefaces, noting that authors often present their works with grandiosity. He categorizes readers into superficial, ignorant, and learned groups, stating that only the learned will truly grasp satire. He also plays with the idea of textual interpretation, humorously claiming that by multiplying the number of times the letter O appears by 7 and dividing by 9, one might discover a hidden mystery. Section 11 introduces a seemingly unrelated truism about the bond between a traveler and his horse before returning to Jack. He grows increasingly obsessed with deciphering his father's will, believing its meaning to be deeper than he originally thought. His fanaticism leads him to justify all his actions through convoluted readings of the will. Jack and Peter, despite being adversaries, frequently cross paths in the city. The narrator laments that he cannot provide more detail but notes that the two have formed an uneasy alliance against Martin for their own selfish ends. However, their partnership is fickle and they abandon each other whenever convenient. In the conclusion, Swift reflects on the appropriate length of a book, asserting that both excessive length and brevity can be detrimental. He recounts a conversation with his bookseller that inspired him to write A Tale of a Tub, predicting that his work will endure through the ages. He humorously describes other authors he has encountered and expresses gratitude and the friendship he has made. A Tale of a Tub is a masterful blend of allegory, satire, and philosophical critique. Through the story of the three brothers, Swift examines the fragmentation of Christianity. Peter representing Catholicism, Martin representing moderate Protestantism, and Jack embodying extreme Protestant sects like Puritanism. The digressions, though seemingly unrelated, enrich the satire by lampooning literary criticism, modern intellectual trends, and religious dogma. The work remains a brilliant and complex critique of human folly, urging readers to recognize the absurdities of both contemporary society and their own interpretive habits.